We're in John chapter 7, and we're at the Feast of Tabernacles. I'll read to you from verse 14. Not until halfway through the feast did Jesus go up to the temple courts and begin to teach. The Jews were amazed, and they asked, "How did this man get such learning without having studied?" And Jesus answered, "My teaching is not my own. It comes from him who sent me. If anyone chooses to do God's will, he will find out whether my teaching comes from God or whether I speak on my own. He who speaks on his own does so to gain honour for himself, but he who works for the honour of the one who sent him is a man of truth. There's nothing false about him. Has not Moses given you the law? And yet not one of you keeps the law. Why are you trying to kill me?" "You're demon-possessed," the crowd answered. "Who's trying to kill you?" Jesus said to them, "I did one miracle, and you are all astonished. Yet, because Moses gave you circumcision, though actually it did not come from Moses but from the patriarchs, you circumcise a child on the Sabbath. Now, if a child can be circumcised on the Sabbath so that the law of Moses may not be broken, why are you angry with me for healing the whole man on the Sabbath? Stop judging by mere appearances and make a right judgment." You can feel the anger, I think, in these exchanges. These are not light exchanges. These are difficult, trying, and Jesus is confronting an establishment teaching here which would seek to bring him down. It said that he went up to the Feast of Tabernacles, and he didn't want to do so publicly because it wasn't his right time. In other words, he didn't want to precipitate the one thing which he wanted to keep under his own control, which was the time when he would offer himself up to be a sacrifice as the Paschal lamb, the Passover lamb, and for that the Passover time was required and needed, which is why that took place at that moment when Jesus precipitated that then. This was a different feast. This was the Feast of Tabernacles, and this was not the time for Jesus to provoke those enemies to take him and kill him. So, Jesus did not go up there with the idea of being a provocateur. And yet, it says, so for the first half of the week of the Feast of Tabernacles, he remained quiet. He said nothing. He was not public. He mingled with the crowd. Nobody knew him was there. They didn't recognize him. Maybe his disciples were there with him, and there he spoke to them. But nothing happened publicly. And then, when he felt the time was safe and we're halfway through the feast, Jesus went up to the temple courts and began to teach. So imagine the courts of the temple, people crowding in, sacrifices being offered, the tabernacles, I think little booths were set up in different places as part of the feast. And in this buzzing milieu where many people were setting up as teachers, and there were crowds, no doubt, and money changing hands, and all kinds of business going on there, and sacrifices being made, in the very heart and hubbub of spiritual life, he begins to teach. Over to one side, you can imagine a situation a bit like Hyde Park Corner, I suppose, in the UK, where you set up a place by the colonnade somewhere and you begin to teach. Now, the teaching was clearly of such quality that it amazed those who heard him. We're not given knowledge of what this particular teaching was. We know it was from the scriptures, an interpretation of the Bible. And we can understand that because that's what is being described here. It amazed the Jews. They were astonished not only at the quality of teaching, but the fact that he was able to teach at all, because they knew this man to be not a rabbi, not someone who'd been to learned college, not someone who had studied the scriptures in the detail and depth which they had themselves given to it. And yet his learning was such as to far outpass those other people, that to leave people amazed by what he said. I suppose if you wanted an example of what that might be, you might think of the Sermon on the Mount. Those kind of teachings and interpretation, that passage, of course, being an interpretation of the Ten Commandments, an explanation of the law of God and how it should be reviewed and re-looked at and refocused through the eyes of Jesus. And how did this man get such learning without having studied? That's a question which they couldn't understand, because it would take some huge ability to be able to unravel the words of God and make them immediate and powerful to the people. And he hadn't been to Bible college. He hadn't been to the seminaries or the synagogues. So he was unknown. Jesus answered, "My teaching is not my own. It comes from him who sent me." So that's an interesting statement. My teaching is not my own. If Jesus had not been to Bible college, or the equivalent of Bible college, if he'd not studied with the rabbis and the learned men and the teachers of the law, as had happened previously with all those other people like Paul or Saul, then where did he get this teaching from? He didn't get it from his elders and betters, and therefore the only place he could have got it from would have been he made it up himself, because it wasn't taught to him by anybody else. It's his own teaching. And I would guess that would be an accusation which had been thrown at Jesus, that how we can't, the amazing teaching, but how do we know it's true? These are just words you've made up yourself, ideas that you have of your own. How can they be true? They haven't come to you from the traditions of our elders. They're your own teachings. So what value do they have? What authority do you have for speaking the way you do? You're not quoting authorities as other people quote authorities. And that's something which is picked up elsewhere. People were astounded at the way he spoke, because he spoke as one having authority in and of himself and not quoting authorities or references for others. But Jesus says, "My teaching is not my own," which is an interesting rebuff. It comes from him who sent me. It comes from God the Father, in other words. There's this constant refrain all the way through John's Gospel that the God the Father has sent me, God the Son, that I have been, the implication I have been with God the Father. It takes us back to John 1:1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. This is the fundamental motif that runs throughout John's Gospel and runs throughout the teaching of Jesus here. My teaching is not my own. It comes from him who sent me. In other words, the words I'm speaking to you, note this, the words I'm speaking to you are the words of God. That's the claim. And it's an astounding claim. If anyone chooses to do God's will, he will find out whether my teaching comes from God or whether I speak on my own. What's proposed here is a kind of an experiment, Put my words into practice in your life, and you will soon find out what the effect is. Try speaking the truth from now on, and only the truth. Don't try to hedge or be less than that. Try teaching honestly. Only ever answer fully the truth. Only ever be kind and nice and fair to people. Treat your neighbour as you would want yourself to be treated by them. Put these things into practice, says Jesus. Test me in this. Test it out for yourself. adopt it. Try it for a few weeks, try it for a few months, try it for a year or two. Try to live in this way that I have set before you, and you will soon learn whether what I've said comes from God or whether it's just man-made words that I've made up myself. And that's a test that every single one of us can try. I mean, and as I think Jordan Peterson has said, what else can you do? What is better than trying to put into practice the things which someone like Jesus, who is acknowledged to be the ethical lighthouse for the world, try putting this stuff into practice and see how it works. And if you try it out, then, says Jesus, you will soon discover whether the things I say are from God or not. And I think that's absolutely true. I would say that if you start speaking the truth, you will find that all the outcomes are better. How, instead of fudging around the truth or saying things which are probably playing things down, but always just tell the truth about everything. Always do things which are right. Never do things which you know knowingly are wrong or bad or weak or false. Never doing any of that, but rather set your course to be honest, true, fair, just, full of mercy, walking humbly with God. Then you will see if these words of mine are true or not. So, that's the test. That's the experiment. In fact, it's a challenge for all of us to do that very thing. Put what I say into practice, and you'll soon find out whether these words are true. And no one has fully done that, because we just don't know what the implication of that might be. If you live the life that Jesus declares every one of us should live, in the way in which we should live to God, and put that first, we don't really know what the outcome of that would be, how that would spin out. We don't know what the end point of that could be. It's huge, and it could be momentous. And Jesus challenges every one of us to do that. So, he says, to repeat, if anyone chooses to do God's will, he will find out whether my teaching comes from God or whether I speak on my own. He who speaks on his own does so to gain honour for himself, like those philosophers who went around the courts, perhaps in Plato's time and Socrates' time. They spoke words of wisdom to people and they gained honour for themselves. Socrates has a very high name. Plato has a very high name. They gain honour for themselves. But, says Jesus here, he who works for the honour of the one who sent him is the man of truth. In other words, he doesn't have any divided loyalties. If you work for a disinterested honour for another, then you have integrity in that. If you're working for the honour of yourself, you might say all manner of things to ingratiate yourself with other people, whether it's true or not. You say the things which will boost your own honour and your own glory, and which will say things which will enhance your own reputation. But if you're seeking to enhance the reputation of God, and it doesn't rebound upon you, then the only motive you can have is you do it because you believe it to be true. You're a man of truth, or a person of truth, and the one who sent him is a man of truth. He who speaks on his own does not gain honour for himself, but he who works for honour for the one who sent him is a man of truth. There is nothing false about him. In other words, because I am talking not to enhance my own reputation, it means that I don't have a divided heart and mind on this matter. I'm not proclaiming what I teach for self-interest. I'm not trying to make myself big or great. I am instead selfless in this regard. I'm not here to enhance my own reputation. I am here enhancing the reputation and the glory of God, which means that my words are based upon truth and not based upon self-interest or self-aggrandizement. Has not Moses given you the law? and yet not one of you keeps the law. Why are you trying to kill me?" So Jesus is interpreting the law, and he brings out the law at this particular point, and Moses at this particular point, because he's teaching in the same way that Moses taught, and he's speaking the words that Moses would have spoken, because Moses spoke as a prophet of God. But Moses gave them the law, and that has come from God. And yet not one of you keeps the law. And here's the indictment against it. I mean, no one is able to keep the law, and Jesus is telling a truism here. The law here, as Paul puts it, is a schoolmaster to lead us to Christ, because by it no one could keep the law, by it nobody could be saved, said Paul. And Jesus is echoing that same idea. None of you keep the law of Moses. Moses gave you the law to show you how to live. And if you choose to do God's will, you will find out that my teaching comes from God. If you do choose to keep God's law in all points, no one has been able to do so. And yet not one of you keeps the law. So, and why are you trying to kill me? That's like the kind of coup de grace phrase here. Because one of the elements of Moses' law, the fifth commandment, thou shalt not commit murder, thou shalt not kill. And yet it's been very clear that they are murmuring against him to the point that they wish to kill him. They do so on the grounds that they are faithful to Moses. And yet the paradox here is that although they claim to be faithful to the Jewish religion, faithful to the patriarchs, faithful to Moses, being pure in the teachings of Moses, pure in their adherence to that, which is why they claim Jesus is someone who is upsetting those things, and why they must get rid of Jesus, because Jesus is overturning them. The things of Moses as they see it, breaking the Sabbath as they see it. They must dispense with Jesus somehow. So you claim Moses as your leader and guidance. He gave you the law, and you break the law. You're hypocrites, basically, is what Jesus is saying. And how do we know that? You're trying to kill me. You're trying to kill me. That breaks one of the commandments which Moses himself gave you. You're breaking that law. In your own hearts and minds, you are transgressors of the law. And therefore, no doubt, Moses will judge you, as he said earlier on. Why are you trying to kill me? This is where they are somewhat ingracious in the way in which they are talking to Jesus. There's a subtlety here where they are denying that they're trying to kill him. Who is trying to kill you? You're demon-possessed, the crowd answered. Who's trying to kill you? It may well be that in a large crowd there were many people who didn't wish to kill Jesus. But he had stirred up antipathy, and they had stirred up anger. And there were the extremists within the crowd, the Jews, the rulers, the teachers of the law, who did wish to kill him. And Jesus was pointing this out right from the very start. Jesus knows the hearts of people, and he makes it clear that they are the ones who are trying to kill him, therefore breaking the very commandments of Moses, which they claim to adhere to. He explains why. Why? Who's trying to kill you? Well, you are. Jesus said, I did one miracle, and you are all astonished. The miracle which I think he's referring to here is the healing at the pool, and the sheep gate of the pool at Bethesda. And this is the place where the lame, the paralysed, and were waiting to go into the pool. with the disturbance of water. Jesus told him to get up, to pick up his mat and walk. And once the man was cured and picked up his mat and walked, he did one miracle, which everyone talked about, everyone knew about. And Jesus said, you did one miracle and you are all astonished. But not just astonished. I think the import of that word is you are all aghast. Aghast at that. You are horrified by it. There's not just the amazement idea here. There's the idea of horrified that I would do such a thing on the Sabbath day, that I would heal someone on a Sunday and break the law of Moses according to you. And yet, says Jesus, Moses gave you circumcision. It wasn't Moses really, it was the patriarchs, because it was Abraham who gave them it. And you circumcise a child on the Sabbath because it has to be on the 8th day. So if the child is born on 8 days prior to that, what would that be? The Monday? No, the Friday. The Friday prior to that, 8 days on, you'd be circumcising on the Sabbath, on the Saturday. And you would circumcise a child on the Sabbath so that the law of Moses may not be broken, because it had to be circumcised on the 8th day. And if you will circumcise somebody on the Sabbath, why are you angry with me when I heal the whole man on the Sabbath? Only one small part of the baby is being, let's say, healed in the sense of purified or brought into the area where the child is made part of the covenant of God. It's a benefit as given by Abraham at that time through the law of Moses, a kind of a therapeutic approach to bringing the child into the family of God. Why are you angry with me that I heal the whole man on the Sabbath? And here's the indictment at the end. Stop judging by mere appearances and make a right judgment. And that's what a lot of criticism comes down to, not only in Jesus' day, not only by the Pharisees, not only by the Jews, judging by appearances, which means this low-level understanding, this blind acceptance of the rules, of being someone who follows the rules to the point that they miss the real purpose behind the rules, that they follow the law to the very letter and not understand the spirit of the law, which is the key point of it. You've missed the whole meaning of things because you judge by appearances. In other words, it's superficial. You have a superficial understanding. You have a very narrow surface understanding of something, and the depth of the real meaning of the law has eluded you. It's escaped you. It's therefore your benefit. The Sabbath is not given to lord it over man so that we must do only this and do only that and do the other thing, because the Sabbath law forbids us to do various things on the Sabbath day. If you think that, you have misunderstood it totally, because the Sabbath was not made, man was not made for the Sabbath was made for man. It's for the benefit of people. It's for their enjoyment as well, for their relaxation. It's not to bind bundles upon their backs and weigh them down with heavy restrictions. It's quite the contrary. It's a release from the drudgery of work and from all the other pressures and stresses of life. You've misunderstood the meaning of the Sabbath law as you misunderstand the meaning of many laws. And so in our day, where we ritualize things, we do things because the rules say we do it this way, and we misunderstand what the purpose of the rules are, was to bring some help and mercy and encouragement and relief to us. And so often we do this. And you find even the petty insistence by petty officials today who will maintain the rule, despite the obvious stupidity and futility of it. And when you question it, people reply that I have to follow the rules like this in this petty, mean-minded kind of way because it's more than my job's worth not to do it. And so they inherit the term job's worths. Job's worths are people who don't understand the purpose of the rules which they enforce, and so they enforce the pettiness of it rather than the spirit of it. And so the Pharisees had come to this point where ritual was all important. The standing up when you are reading the gospel, or the incense moving around in this kind of way, or whatever other ritual might be paraded before us as being something which is essential to our Christian life, when what really is essential is the spiritual meaning behind it. Ritual is always a substitute for reality. It's a cardboard cutout that we can do to satisfy our baser instincts. But, says Jesus, stop judging by appearances, stop judging by the surface of things, and instead judge rightly. Understand the true spiritual nature of things. Learn how mercy is the important thing here, particularly when it comes to the Sabbath, and do things to enhance people and to understand the real meaning of the law of God, which is a benefit to us and not a burden to be carried all the time. Stop judging by appearances, judge by truth and reality.